Oh my God.
That's new. That's new. They tell you it's being recorded now, so I can't get your innermost thoughts before I start recording. Anyway. Hey, KU fans, welcome to the KU Sports Hour here at KUsports.com with Shane Jackson and Benton Smith, along with the new voice of Zoom telling you it's recording. I am Matt Tate. We're going to talk a lot of football today, a lot of football. We've got all kinds of football news happening. I think the last time the three of us got together for one of these deals, it was to kind of react to Lance Leipold and his hiring and maybe his introduction and all that stuff. And fast forward, and a month has passed, and he's hired 3,000 people, and he's brought in 67,000 transfers, and things are
everybody's from Buffalo,
right? Things
coaches,
are completely different.
Players. I mean, probably somebody from Buffalo is going to hop on this Zoom call. We didn't even invite them, but they're going to come through just because that's what people from Buffalo do.
If I need to admit these people.
Yeah.
Have you seen that logo, the Bulls logo with the little KU in it on the white helmet? I mean,
I saw that on Twitter somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people have mixed feelings about that.
I'm sure they do.
Combining logos.
My neighbor just asked me, like, poor Buffalo, huh? This is what he said. Poor Buffalo. And I think that's fair. Like, poor Buffalo's right. They lost a lot of talented players and obviously half of their coaching staff, their head coach. But I don't get the sense that anybody's crying about it. You know, it's a new start for them. They get a new opportunity. And I think from everything that I've been able to gather, I mean, they love Lance up there, and they're thrilled for him to get this opportunity. I would think there's a lot of people in Buffalo that are rooting for Kansas all of a sudden. And that's not a natural connection by any means. I don't even know how many people in Kansas have been to Buffalo, let alone Niagara Falls, all that area. I mean, so, I don't know if it's poor Buffalo or not, but it's definitely decimated them a little bit and been to KU's advantage for sure. So we're going to talk about all of it here today, as much as we can anyway, and let Benton Smith dominate and carry the day. Shane's goal is to say less than 100 words, I think.
Yeah, I'm only here to show off I think I have a Buffalo blue shirt, is what we're going to call it.
Wow.
So that's really the reason why I'm here on this pod.
Shane's here under protest. He's here begrudgingly.
That's great. I don't think I shared this last time, but when I went to Florida in whatever month that would have been, the end of April, right before, like 5 days before Leipold was hired. And when I got to, we flew into Tampa, and when I got to baggage claim, this guy was hovering around the belt, desperately trying to get his bag, as travelers do. And he finally got it, and he turned around and he walked toward me, and he had a Buffalo Bulls shirt on. And at the time, it was very much obvious that Lance Leipold was in the mix and was possibly going to be the guy. But nothing.
Was it Brian Borland?
I don't think it was. Good question, though.
Andy Kotelnicki?
There was also a guy on the plane who, from Kansas City to Tampa, who had a Navy football visor on. And that got
Scott Stanford.
That's our former publisher who lived and died with Navy football. But yeah, that got me looking into maybe this is Ken Niamabatalolo, or however you pronounce it. Maybe he's sneaking in the back door here as that candidate nobody knows about. But who cares? Let's talk about the stuff we do know. That stuff's all in the distant past now. Benton, 7 players from Buffalo, 6 from Buffalo, and 1 who was headed to Buffalo from Vautech, coming to KU over the weekend. I mean, look, Bill Self added 9 or 10 guys over this offseason, and he did it gradually, and that seemed like a lot. To do it in one weekend, to get that many transfers in one weekend, I mean, it seems like it was a pretty coordinated effort. These guys were all just waiting to kind of announce at the same time, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, it's not like they all decided, like, this past weekend, oh, I think I'm going to go to KU. Like, obviously, they've known for a while that Lance Leipold has taken this program over. And, I'm sure as soon as he had all of his staff in place, there were already a lot of Buffalo guys in the transfer portal. And so, I mean, that wasn't new either. Some of them had been in there even before spring ball.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's one of those kind of things, like, you can't just be blatant about it. Like, if you're Lance Leipold at your introductory press conference, you can't say, by the way, I'm bringing like 6 players from Buffalo.
I'm taking this guy and this guy, this guy, and this guy.
So, I mean, but clearly it's been in the works for a long time, and they all decided to just kind of announce, in one big wave, Memorial Day weekend, right as the players are, kind of getting to campus and getting geared up for that summer strength and conditioning stuff they'll be doing, and have already started actually. So, I thought it was interesting, the timing, because you would have thought that just like as the guy made a decision, he might kind of just, put it out there, but they kind of waited to do it all together. So kind of a team approach, which to me kind of like goes hand in hand with what you hear about a Lance Leipold program, kind of what you hear from, we talked to the various assistants, and I mean, it seems like they're very much, kind of a team first kind of people, and that's a team first way to come in as a transfer, right? To just do it in, 6 guys, boom, 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 over the course of 10 or 12 hours or whatever it was, Sunday and Monday. But it's pretty interesting. And obviously because of the current landscape with NCAA and the transfer portal and, new rules about transferring, all these guys can play. So that's the biggest thing. There's no waiting around for these guys to be key contributors on the roster. They'll all get to play this year. And I mean, there's no reason to think that really all these guys will be on the 2 deep like immediately, right? Because I mean, there's some legit veterans that are coming, and there's some younger guys that are coming, but they all should be able to contribute. So I mean, just a huge pull for Lance Leipold and his staff to bring all these guys in and kind of help get things started with this rebuild.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, and we'll get to the assistants here in a little bit, but let's start kind of diving into these players, who they are, and we don't have to go full bio and life story or anything like that, but just in case people aren't familiar, it's 2 D linemen, 2 offensive linemen, a receiver, 3 D linemen, right? Sorry.
If you count the transfer coming in from Virginia Tech, who's a grad transfer who was going to go to Buffalo. Yeah. But obviously once Leipold left, Zion DeBose decided, I'll go to KU instead, because that's where Leipold and those assistants are going.
There you go. So he's a DN, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 defensive linemen, 2 offensive linemen, receiver, linebacker.
Yep.
It's pretty important positions, obviously, but when you look at 5 of them are up front on either side of the ball. I mean, to me, that's the biggest thing. The receiver, great. If he can come in and play, that's awesome. You upgrade there. They've got some decent receivers. They've got some young, talented receivers. So maybe he fits into that mix. Maybe he's not an automatic difference maker, but he can be a piece and a part of that receiving room and all that stuff. The linebacker's huge. We'll get to that in a minute, but I just have to think that the guys up front are the biggest part of this story. Shane, you looked a little at the offense, especially right when they announced the assistants with Kotelnicki being the new offensive coordinator, and there's a new O-line coach. Did you talk to him too, Shane?
I did talk to the offensive line coach. Yeah.
Okay. Share with us what you think about the addition of this center, Mike. What's it, Nowitzki?
Nowitzki. Obviously, that's probably the biggest one. That's the one everybody's kind of drawn to, and for good reason. I mean, a handful of months ago when Colin Grunhard was coming here, and all he had done is played garbage snaps against Notre Dame, whatever. Like, you could talk yourself into him having a role because KU's offensive line was really bad last year. So almost anything was an upgrade, and he was able to bring some sort of culture with that. Well, now you throw in the mix that there's actually a center who was a first-team All-MAC. I mean, that's a real player as well. So it definitely is a big, unexpected boost, I think, to the offensive line, and one that desperately needed it based off last year, and one that even was going to get a little bit of an upgrade just before this happened.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, Grunhard, he's going to help, and now he doesn't have to be everything, right? I mean, if he's a backup center, that's great news, and you get depth out of that. If he can play, maybe they slide him into a guard position and he plays there. Maybe he's just a backup at all 3 spots in the interior. I don't know, but Benton, what I mean, it's way too early, obviously, but what does this do to the makeup of that first string offensive line? I mean, obviously the new guy is starting at center. I mean, nobody's going to dispute
question.
That, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was first team All-MAC. He has started the past 2 seasons for a good program at Buffalo. Like, he's your starting center.
Right.
You don't have to worry about it.
So go out from there. What's it look like?
He knows the OC. He knows the O-line coach, who we all have gone out of our way not to mispronounce his name because it's a tricky one. The way Fuchs. I don't want to. I'm just being very careful.
Right. I think that's right, because I think
to
protect yourself, you want to say Fuchs.
Right.
But it's not that. So it is Fuchs, yes. I think. But it is not Okay.
It's NSFW.
Right. If I was better at editing this stuff, I would have totally said it and then just bleeped it out. It would have been cross one off my bucket list, but I don't have time for that, so I'm just not going to say it. But let's go out from there. I mean, the guards and the tackles, as things maybe look today, obviously there's a whole off season to go through summer workouts and then preseason camp and all that stuff, so things could change. But what does it look like to you, at least, as things stand today, branching out from that new center?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you just go off of kind of like what was going on in the spring, obviously you kind of replace Colin Grunhard and Adagio Lopetti at center with Mike Nowitzki. But the guards in the spring, I think on the right side, there was Armaj Adams-Reed, who's a younger guy. And then on the left side, they had, Malik Clark was back at left guard after, that experiment at left tackle last year that didn't work out so well. So Earl Bostic was playing left tackle in the spring, and Bryce Cabledew was at right tackle. So the interesting thing about that is, like, I mean, it seemed like they were pretty happy with that, but now you get a significant upgrade at center, and you also have another O-lineman coming in who, apparently was pretty highly regarded at Buffalo in Michael Ford. So he could potentially kind of become a starting tackle too. So all of a sudden you have this nice upgrade at a position that has just been a disaster the past few years, last year especially. So, I mean, this really cannot be better news unless they were just bringing in, 5 proven starters to just plug right in. But I mean, this is great news for that O-line.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I think more than anything too, as we've kind of mentioned, it brings a lot of depth. Whatever shakes out as far as who starts or who doesn't, you're looking at, if those two guys can factor in, if Ford's a depth piece, so be it. If he starts, then one of those guys who was gonna start is now a depth piece. Nowitzki, we already talked about at center. Now you have all those guys you mentioned, and obviously Grunhard providing depth there, and maybe at guard as well. We didn't mention Chris Hughes, who is back, right?
Yeah. I mean, just because it seemed like, I don't know if he was dealing with some stuff in the spring still. He obviously had an injury last year that kind of cut his season short. But he's in the mix. He just wasn't repping with those other guys as much this spring. And that might be kind of a case of overcoming a long-term foot injury and not pushing it in the spring. But yeah, that's a guy who's in the mix to play. Absolutely. Because arguably their best offensive lineman last year. Really.
That's what I was going to ask Shane. I mean, he did the breakdowns, I think. Was that right? Did he grade out as their top lineman from last year? Do you remember?
Yeah, he especially run blocking wise, he was usually the best there. And that's been the case, I think, now for 2 years. And depth is important because it really just prevents guys from maybe playing out of position, because part of the early offensive line struggles was just Malik Clark had to play left tackle, almost by necessity because of a late transfer, moving from left guard to left tackle. And this switches, this prevents you from having to do that. And you can play guys more in their positions comfortable. Obviously, you want guys who have versatility, but you don't want to force it if it's not there.
Great point. And how about that too? You say Hughes grades out best as a run blocker. And what is Leipold done the last couple of years? At least last year.
What do they need to do with this personnel on this roster?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a very, very nice bouquet of greatness just blooming right there. You couldn't ask for more. They got to go out and produce. They got to go out and perform. They've got to be good. And there's a long way to go before we know if that's the case or not. But at least heading into summer and preseason, that's all you can ask for right there. So that covers the O-line, obviously. On the defensive side of the ball, so much was made about losing the two guys to Auburn and Tennessee, Terry and Harris.
Yep.
And like a lot of people anyway have asked me, well, does this replace that? And I don't know, man. It certainly doesn't hurt, right? Like you're bringing in, especially Eddie Wilson, is that right?
Yep.
Another all-MAC type of performer.
Yeah, third team all-MAC, I think, last year.
Yeah, this is a beast of a man who's played a lot of snaps, who plays a physical style. He certainly is a guy that you're happy to be able to plug in to help replace one of those guys. But at the same time, those guys just left for the SEC. I mean, this is
Yeah.
so it's I think KU fans are super excited right now. There's a lot of good vibes and good things happening, but I still think it would be worth everybody just taking a deep breath and remembering, like, we still have to see how this goes, and all signs point to much, much better football ahead, a much, much more organized and a program with a plan and some kind of just movement that ties together and moves forward in a positive way and develops and progresses and all those things. But we still have to see it. And so I don't know that you can sit here and say, well, Eddie Wilson's the same. We didn't need Terry or Harris. I mean, those guys are playing at Auburn and Tennessee now, so you'll take him and he helps. He helps offset the loss. But I don't think that's by any means a one-to-one type of trade. Am I making too much of that?
No, I think you're absolutely right, because I mean, this is just my opinion, but I mean, I thought those were two of the most, maybe 4 or 5 guys on the roster heading into this year.
Yeah.
And both of them left. And so, I mean, as you mentioned, all of a sudden KU has this gaping hole in the D line. So they definitely kind of addressed that with these transfers coming in. But the thing about Harris and Terry were that they were both going to be sophomores this year.
Right.
I mean, you had 3 more years of these guys, and their best years were ahead of them. So, I mean, you're bringing in some kind of more experienced D linemen, so that's a sign that they can play right away probably, and that's good for sure, because you're going to need them to. But you're not going to have them for as long, right? I mean, you're going to have them 2 years at best if they kind of take advantage of those eligibility rules because of the pandemic, where, last year doesn't really count against your eligibility if a program wants to use it that way. So you would think KU would want to do that with these kind of more experienced guys they're bringing in. We'll see. None of that's official or anything.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, great job of filling a need immediately. And I'm sure, like we said at the top, that they've known this is coming for sure. So they probably didn't feel too stressed out about losing Terry and Harris. But I think those guys, as you mentioned, they weren't in the transfer portal long, and the teams that welcomed them in were both SEC, kind of famed programs. I know they're not at the height of their powers like they used to be, but I mean, those are legit programs.
Yeah, you can get back there at any point. And I think it's interesting with the D-line too, because as much as, those 2 linemen coming in on the offensive side are coming to play for their same coordinator and their same position coach, that's not exactly what's happening with the D-line guys.
Right.
Quan Drake was already on KU's staff. So, yeah, Brian Borland, the defensive coordinator, will be familiar to them, and I'm sure he'll run a lot of things that they're used to and they're comfortable with. But there will be a little bit more of an adjustment for them and for Drake, too, getting to know them. And so it's not quite as big of a kind of an explosion of goodness like it is on the offensive side, where you're talking about same position coach, same offensive coordinator, and quite possibly a whole lot of the same scheme and style and all of that. So by no means is it bad news. I mean, Drake is a very adaptable dude, a very likable coach, a player's coach. I mean, these guys are going to get to know him in 5 seconds flat and probably get to love him pretty quickly. And he's obviously all in. We talked to him a couple of weeks ago. He loves the new defensive coordinator. He loves Leipold. This is a cool thing happening with the way those 2 staffs are kind of blending into one, but that's important. And so the other 2 defensive linemen, real quick, before I keep talking too much, McGee is the other one from Buffalo, and then there's the Virginia Tech transfer. Just real quickly about those 2.
Yeah, I mean, McGee is a guy who, played at Buffalo and was a reserve defensive lineman. So he's a guy that's going to, kind of give you depth, I would think, more than anything. And Zion DeBose, was at Virginia Tech the past 4 years, only ended up playing 2 seasons because he redshirted his first year and then had an injury 2 years ago, but he was a backup at Virginia Tech last year. So to me, you're really addressing depth on the D-line, which would seem like it was going to be an issue, especially if you're going away from a 3-4 and playing a 4-man front instead.
Yeah.
You're going to need bodies up there. And so you're bringing in older guys. That's always preferable, right? You want to have an older guy on the O-line or the D-line. So you're doing that. And I don't think that to me, like the O-line coming in are a much bigger deal and like probably going to, have a bigger impact than the D linemen, even though that there's 3 of those guys. and I mean, we'll see how it plays out. But I mean, for me, Eddie Wilson was the biggest addition, just because, you know, that's a guy who started. That's a guy who produced. That's a guy who you expect will start immediately. I don't know for sure that, you know, that DeBose will start. He might, you know, just be a key reserve, and I don't know that McGee will start. And obviously Quan Drake knows and really likes a lot of the guys that were already on the roster. So that'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But to me, Wilson was the big get on the D line.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways, maybe you hope they don't start those other two guys, you know, because that means what you've got is
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, familiar, already a little bit developed, and maybe ready to kind of take that next step, because that's what they were going to have to do before this, right? It was going to be next man up, and Quan Drake had talked a lot about that already with you, talking about, hey, let's, you know, look, yeah, we would have rather Terry and Harris stayed. Anybody would, but we've got this guy and that guy and this guy and that guy who are coming, and we're ready for them to break out and show what they can do. So if that continues to be the trend and these guys are depth pieces, that's win-win-win all the way across the board, I think. Shane, anything on the defensive line?
Well, I was just gonna say I think the important part of that, even without maybe the departures, you know, of Harris and Terry, is that they still would welcome, you know, a player or two defensive line wise, because that position more than anything else is about rotating guys and keeping guys fresh, and you don't want to play two guys the entire time. So
Sure.
I think even without the departures, like these guys could be added to the mix and have been a big boost to that unit.
There you go. Good point. Let's stay on that side of the ball. Rich Miller, linebacker. I don't think you can ever have enough linebackers. I don't think you can ever have enough linebackers with experience. I don't know a ton about him, but take us through his style of play, what he brings, and the big question is, can he run? I mean, that's what you have to do to play linebacker in the Big 12, right? You have to be fast in some way, shape, or form, even if it's like deceptively fast, like Joe Deneen was.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, Miller at least bring you some experience, because I mean, he has played in every game the past 2 years. When he first got on campus, he did a lot more special team stuff, but he ended up being like a key reserve linebacker in 2020. And so, I mean, obviously, you know, you look across the board at KU's two deep, and there's very few positions or position groups even where you're like, all right, you don't need any help here. You know,
Right,
you're fine.
right.
Like running back, you're in a pretty good spot, and in the secondary, you're in a decent spot. But everywhere else, I mean, you probably need bodies, and you might need a guy like Miller to come in and kind of supplant somebody, because their linebacking core is, you know, trending pretty young heading into this year, and now you've got a guy who has college game experience, and, you know, I mean, not kind of prolific in his production or anything, but, you know, made some plays as a reserve. And like you wrote the other day, Tate, I mean, all of these guys that played at Buffalo and know these coaches are going to be helpful in the transition more than anything.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if that's another perk of it, fantastic. But if you're KU, you really are probably going to want a lot of these guys to be able to contribute, even if they're not starters, just be a key reserve. So, I mean, to me, Miller is a guy that could end up being in the mix to start. I mean, to me, there's nobody like in concrete, hey, this is a starting linebacker. So to me, it's kind of up for grabs, and, you know, the competition will come in August in that preseason camp.
I think it'll be really interesting with him too, not just because of what you talked about with the status of KU's linebacking core, but also his familiarity with the defensive coordinator, and linebackers coach Simpson.
Yep.
I forget his first name. Chris.
We didn't get to talk to him, and I think it's Chris Simpson. I'm just going to double check to make sure we're right.
It is.
I'm like, now you put that seed of doubt in my mind.
I know.
It definitely is Chris Simpson. And then he's like, is it Chris Simpson? I was like, oh no. Is it? Do we both have it wrong?
I felt pretty good pulling it out. But anyway, my point is, that's another guy like the center, Nowitzki, who is coming to play for his same DC and his same position coach. And because of the status of KU's linebacking core, and because of his experience, I mean, to me, that's a guy who, yeah, he should expect to come in here and start and compete to start. And if he does win a starting job, you could be looking at a quarterback type of guy of your defense right there, just because of his familiarity with what they do and the systems that those two guys run and have run for his last two seasons. So forget the talent and the production and the numbers and the experience even. I mean, if all that comes or stays the same or progresses on his trend that he's been following throughout his career, then that's great news. But, man, if you add a bona fide leader at that position too, I mean, I don't know anything about his makeup. Maybe he's the quietest dude on the planet, but I don't think very many linebackers end up being very quiet. So that's just another area where you might be gaining more than just a body, more than just a player. You might be gaining a pretty important leader on your defense. So I think he's one to watch for sure. And it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of role he takes on early, but also throughout August and into the start of the season. That leaves us with one player that we haven't talked about, and he's kind of an interesting player because he's a wide receiver, but also there's his younger brother who now has a KU offer, if I'm not mistaken, right? So Wilson is the last name for both of them, and I don't really remember anything about their first names.
Well, Trevor Wilson is the receiver coming in. He's a guy that actually kind of had a breakout game late last year, and so he wasn't like a key part of that offense, but it also was an offense where they were happy to just run the ball 45 times.
Right.
So, I mean, he'll feel right at home coming into this KU team, I'm sure, playing for an offense that is probably going to run the ball as much as it can. But, I mean, when you think about KU's receiving core, like headed into last year, we all thought that was going to be just a huge strength because of the personnel returning, right? Because of Andrew Parchment and Stephon Robinson and Kwame Lassiter. And then the offense was so inept that, I mean, it didn't really matter who you were playing at receiver, and Stephon Robinson got hurt, and all of a sudden, the passing game was non-existent. And now Parchment and Robinson have moved on, and that receiving group looks a lot thinner, So I think this is a guy that actually can contribute. Because other than that, you're talking about Kwame Lassiter coming back. Lawrence Arnold got hurt early last year. He was a guy it seemed like they were going to be counting on. So, maybe Trevor Wilson ends up, plugging in and playing and actually contributing some. But to me, receiver, just is nowhere near the strength that it was a year ago as far as personnel. So, I mean, it's another big positive, I thought, to bring a guy like that in who, knows the system, knows obviously Leipold and Kotelnicki. So that was one of it might be an under the radar guy at this point, but, in a few months, we might not think about it that way.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We got about 10 minutes left. And then Shane, big picture on all this. I mean, we've kind of talked about it vaguely, but also obviously broken down each player. I mean, should people be excited? I mean, I see a lot of KU fans on Twitter saying, here we go. This is great news. We're back. And I mean, again, I'm not trying to discourage anybody from being excited. I think you should be excited. Good things are happening. Everything that has happened with this program since Leipold was hired has come with the appearance of a coach and a staff and a program that knows what it's doing. That's positive. You should be excited about that. But this is still a major hurdle that you're going to have to climb in the first year to figure out where you're at. I mean, it's easy to look at all this on paper and put this culture in and all this stuff. But, man, getting out there and actually winning some games, if they do that, then the whole thing changes and your expectations need to adjust accordingly. But right now, I think it's still the right move to just expect very little, hope for the best, and believe that this is going to be a very positive foundation type year, a year one that you can actually be happy about rather than just, oh my God, here we go again. So big picture, Shane, what do these 7 guys mean to that kind of philosophy or way of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a stretch, obviously, saying that adding 7 guys will change the trajectory of this year's team, but I do think it is a good sign. For one, they followed the coaches here. That speaks volumes to just that alone, and how much confidence and comfort they had with the coaching staff to follow them here to a situation that maybe they wouldn't have wanted to be in otherwise. And mostly, I think the part that was interesting to me is just there were different position groups along the way. Like this wasn't just one massive, let's throw a bunch of pieces at one position group and let's fix that unit. This was, let's sprinkle in over a few different position groups. And now maybe that helps the transition a little bit. You got guys who are more comfortable with some of these position coaches in a shorter off season where everything's going to be kind of like just thrown out real quick. I think having a few guys that are familiar with some of the terminology is helpful.
Yeah, that's very well said. Benton, same question. I mean, does this alter your view of expectations, or should it? What are your thoughts about? I mean, again, we talked about all these guys could be factors, like you said, on the 2 deep at the very least, possibly a handful of starters in that mix. I mean, that's just not something to sneeze at. But how big do you think it really is?
Well, I mean, it's all relative, right? Because I mean, this team
absolutely
really struggled last year for the majority of the season. They had one tight game at the very end at Texas Tech, and it ended up being their finale. But in the other 8 games, they weren't competitive. So you've got so much ground to make up that, even if you're bringing in a starting center that helps your O-line, make a pretty good leap, it's not like everything else was fine, right? So there's so many things to fix, and this is such a long-term project that I think they're definitely in a better position heading into this year than I thought they would be, especially after Marcus Harris and Dejon Terry left. I thought those guys losing those guys could literally lose KU, a winnable game if there was one of those on the schedule, So,
sure.
I mean, as far as this year, I still think it's going to be uphill, right, for this program. And that's nobody's fault. That's nobody's transfer's fault or Lance Leipold's fault. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. And, he's the guy's not a miracle worker. He can't just show up and automatically get you bowl eligible the first year. It's going to take some time. If you end up going 3-9 this year, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I don't think that would be a failure of a season. I know that's nothing to get excited about if you're a football fan, but if you really do have to continue to be patient, which is, I feel like we've been saying for the past 6 years. But this year, at least, it seems like you really are kind of turning a quarter and heading in a good direction. So that there is that. If you can make it through 2021, 2022 might be pretty interesting.
There you go. Yeah, that's well said. And look, that's the other thing, right? Like the all MAC first team, all MAC third team. I mean, the MAC's a great football conference, and the MAC's had a bunch of teams come in and beat Big 12 teams. Mm-hmm. But the MAC's not the Big 12. It's a different style, and it's a different level top to bottom. So that's something that you should probably keep in mind too. I mean, these guys are very good football players, especially from where they're coming from and the competition they were playing against. Can they elevate their game to be on this same level with Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, Baylor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, that's the big question. I'm not saying they can't. It's something to remember about expecting too much out of all of those guys or any of those guys, because as much as they're still playing for their same head coach and in some cases their same position coach, and there's a lot to like about that continuity and how that can help the culture and the transition to Leipold here for Kansas, there's still going to be an adjustment for every one of those dudes because it's a new experience entirely for them. So I think that, they're going to have to learn how to play in the Big 12. They're going to have to learn how to adjust to Kansas, the school, the city, the university, their classes, everything. I mean, there are still some new things. So I think that's got to be considered when you're thinking about how big this can be. But there's no question that if you have A, you get these 7 guys, or B, you don't, you take A every time. I mean, that seems very obvious. And I see Shane loving my genius back there. Any final thoughts before we get out of here? We didn't get to the assistants today. We'll have to do that another time, but they're not going anywhere. So players play, and we got to them first. But Benton, wrap it up real quick with your final thoughts on just what was a kind of a crazy weekend. They just kept coming, 3 at a time, then 3 at a time, and then one more. Do you think they're done? Let's end there.
I mean, it's possible another one might trickle in. There's obviously time for that, but I think people should be particularly excited about Nowitzki coming in and Ford coming in. I mean, those seem like those could be two key pieces for this year and beyond.
Perfect. That's Benton Smith up there in the corner, in my corner anyway, Shane Jackson. He's headed to Vegas soon for a little fun in the sun.
Oh,
wish him luck. Keep him in your thoughts. And maybe this is the last time you see him. If he hits it big, you may just say. On that note, thanks for checking out the KU Sports Hour. We'll be back with a lot more football talk throughout the rest of the summer as they're getting started with summer workouts, and we are getting started with summer coverage. We'll talk to you guys again real soon.